Welcome to Swissnex. My name is Benjamin Bollman. I am the CEO of Swissnex here in Boston and its New York office as well, where we work to connect Switzerland and the world in the fields of education, research, innovation, and the arts. As I said at an event we co-organized last night as well, we are delighted to host the SENSE this week. The SENSE is an initiative all around the sensory system of the University Hospital in Lausanne, called the CHUV, the University of Lausanne, as well as the University of Applied Sciences in Valais, in Switzerland. We think it's a great fit for us at Swissnex to work with them. It's been amazing to work with them so far. The scientific and academic director of the SENSE, Micah Murray here, who will moderate the panel tonight, is American. He is from Boston. He grew up in the Boston area, so he has this place in his DNA. The SENSE also has a scientific chairman who is based in the US, and other board members that are based in the US. And so it really is an illustration of this very strong bond that there is between our two countries when it comes to science and innovation. Also, as I said last night, the US is for us our very top number one partner country when it comes to science and innovation. When it comes to science, we co-publish scientific papers with the US more than with any other country in the world. Swiss startups get more investments from the US than from any other country in the world, including Switzerland. And Swiss investors invest more in the US startups than in Swiss startups as well. And the US is also our number one trade partner, so we export more to the US than to any other country in the world, including Germany next door, so it's quite impressive. And I think you can recognize the Swiss presence here in Cambridge very well. You go down the street, you see Novartis, Biogen, which was founded in Geneva, Biotechnology Geneva, and so forth. So Micah is the living illustration of that strong bond. We are also very excited because the SENSE is a relatively new initiative, but that really tries to connect different Swiss institutions together and connect very different disciplines together. So that corresponds very well to Swissnex, where we try to collide different disciplines, different sectors, different geographies. A little bit, sometimes we say we're a bit of a CERN, but not for particles like in Geneva, but for people and ideas, and we make them collide in the hope that something sparks and it generates something. So that's also, I think, a little bit the mindset and ethos of the SENSE. And last but not least, we've been very impressed by the quality of the people behind the SENSE, the breadth of expertise and disciplines that it represents, and therefore are delighted to have them here. So we are the home of Swiss universities and Swiss innovation on the East Coast. So we are the home for the SENSE this week here, where they do a bootcamp on healthcare innovation, including two events, including the one tonight, where we hope to create these collisions I was talking about between different people, different ideas, in the hope that this leads to new collaborations in the years to come. So please feel free to connect also during the networking receptions afterward to exchange your ideas, and let's see where it leads. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and over to you, Micah, to lead the panel. Thank you.
Right. First, thank you, Benjamin, and to the entire Swissnex team. Really, again, it's been wonderful to be hosted by you and to work together. So as Benjamin said, we're thinking about collisions and channeling, and our BISSE program, this Bootcamp for Innovation, Science, Society, and Entrepreneurship, is really trying to create these collisions. And tonight we're colliding neuroscience with public health, and in particular brain health. And the event, of course, is called Where Do We Go From Here, which is a larger series that Swissnex offers to the public on many different topics, from climate to health and the arts as well. And tonight it's about brain health, and in particular 3 different domains that each of our panelists will be addressing, but not as a completed operation. And this is where your participation will be extremely important, because it's where we go from here, not we've finished and we're all done, and here's what we've discovered. So I think that it's an important change in how science operates, that we don't think of an endpoint today, but where we're going to take our endpoints today, tomorrow. So the three domains, and I'm realizing that I can't see my own notes anymore, are identifying the public need, which will be covered by Katja, which are about the tools and technologies needed to identify and screen and treat children on neurodevelopmental issues on the one hand in developed countries like Switzerland and this part of the US at least, but also in lower and middle income countries. How do we make this a practical endeavor? How do we progress from scientific discoveries to real-world implementation? The second domain is, of course, translating or transforming education via neuroscientific discoveries, which is probably a very broad topic in and of itself. But how do we realistically do that? How do we take what we think we know in the lab and put it into practice in education? And our second panelist, Paul, will be addressing that topic. And finally, how do we achieve this in a responsible and ethical manner? Because we can think that we're going to be changing the world for the good. And somebody was saying earlier, I think it was Maria, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so how do we remain mindful of that while also trying to care for the individuals of our communities? And for that, Gabriel will be leading the discussion on that. And we've structured tonight in the following way, where each of our panelists will be giving you a glimpse into the current state of affairs. But then it's your job. And so you have a bottle or a glass in hand, which should make you more relaxed. But it'll be your job to tell us what you think and to help us co-create where we go from here. So please get yourselves ready for that. You have a little bit of time as they present, but get yourself ready for that. So let me tell you a little bit about our panelists. First tonight is Dr. Katja Steinfeld, who is an MD and received her medical degree from the University of Lausanne. She's now also a PhD candidate at the University of Lausanne. Her research is focused primarily on the long-term and brain consequences of myopia and other refractive errors that are indeed a true pandemic, projected to affect, I think, about half the population between now and 2030. But that's not all. Katja, in addition to doing all of this training, launched and continues to operate an NGO in her home country of Rio, or almost home country of Rio, called ESCO, which is about screening and delivering vision care to children in inner city Rio. And they are handing out glasses to about 1,000 kids, if I remember right, and screening every year about 3,000 to 4,000 children. And they started in 2017. So it's important to her, therefore, to also not only take her discoveries from the lab, but turn it into field work ready, if you will, implementation. So we'll be hearing from Katja momentarily. Our second panelist tonight is Paul Matusch, who is an assistant professor at the the University of Applied Sciences in Valais, where he is also responsible for the Physio Lab, which falls under the School of Health there. Paul has received his PhD in the UK, has been working in Switzerland for about the last 10 years or so, and he's also a founding member and board member of the Swiss Society for Early Childhood Research, as well as the editor-in-chief of the journal Mind, Brain, and Education, which I believe is the only publication about, or associated with an association about these topics. Last but not least, we have the pleasure of having Gabriel, I'm going to butcher your name.
No, try it.
Lazaro Munoz,
Awesome.
which
That's
is
good.
terribly butchered, who's an assistant professor of not only psychiatry, but also at the Center for Bioethics here at Harvard Medical School, and the Department of Psychiatry at Mass General. He is a transdisciplinary individual combining neuroscience with ethics and law, which I think is an incredibly brave endeavor. We've only just met tonight, so this is why I butcher his name. But he's truly involved in what are the considerations that we need to put in place as we take our research into innovation and into public use. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from him. So without further ado, I'll shut my mouth and let you hear from the more interesting people and give over the microphone to Katja.
So it's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you so much for you all for coming. I recognize some faces from earlier today, so it's really a pleasure to be talking to all of you, and an honor really to have your attention tonight. Funny story. I was here in 2018, so when I had the first idea for the NGO. It was I won a competition at the University of Lausanne, and we got some funding to actually do a pilot project of what is now the NGO. And part of the prize was coming to Boston for a conference and coming to Swissnex and presenting in the same room in 2018 before it all started. So it feels like a little bit of a time machine to be here. As Micah said, my name is Katja Steinfeld. I'm an MD PhD candidate, and I have kind of this double agent role. So this is the name of the NGO. It's called Escolares, if you can master that difficult phoneme, to your credit. If you can't, you can just call it ESCO. And as Micah said, we screen about 3,000, 4,000 children every year, which means that we provide then the ophthalmological exams. We do everything in school, so we don't lose any children along the process. And then we deliver the glasses at school. And for the children that need further treatment, for instance, for amblyopia, or any other really visual condition, then we have a network of partner private practitioners to which they then get routed to and can pursue their treatment, and they get free transportation and free consultations. So it really it's something I've been building over the years. At first I didn't expect it to keep growing, but it is, and I'm very happy it is. I don't do it alone. I do it mostly with a team of medical students in the two countries, so in Switzerland and in Brazil. So it's also a very nice opportunity for the medical students to exchange and to experience from very early on in their training and their career how different medicine can be around the world. This is basically the same. So 8,000 children screened since it first started, 2,500 ophthalmology exams, and 1,500 eyeglasses donated, which I'm very happy. I think it's a great achievement that the whole teams of students and myself have made. But if you think about the 160,000 children of the city of Rio, where we act, not even just Brazil, the city of Rio, this is really a small drop. There's so much more to be done. So when we provide these glasses, you can say, well, it's provide this pair of glasses, and so what? What does this really do? So there's a large evidence from studies around the world in developing countries and in developed countries that show that really that improves academics, that improves literacy, which is a big topic. I guess Paul will discuss a little bit about that. And also school attendance. They estimated in Brazil that about 20% of kids that have the largest lowest attendance and the largest dropout rates could be due, because it's an estimate, to visual issues. And also there's a lot of studies that show that the earnings of these children in the future, when they're adults, are largely affected. So this seems to all make sense, right? It seems quite logical, but the data is also there. And then, so we're increasing all that. So that's the positive side. And also positive, we're decreasing disability, visual disability, refractive error, and also we find always blindness cases, kids that are legally blind and still operating in a normal school environment because it's never been diagnosed. There are also life-threatening illnesses. We have caught on, for instance, very early on cancer. There was a tumor in the retina. And also mental health conditions that have been shown to be associated. So, if you can't perform well at school, if you can't meet expectations around you, if you can't socialize, if you can't play sports, that will have a link with depression rates in adolescents, suicide rates in adolescents. So it's really a simple gesture that could be a life-saving intervention. And then also safety risks, because obviously, if you don't see, if you're legally blind and you're going to school on your own in an environment that is, low resource setting, so you can imagine, it's not a very regulated environment. There are safety risks there, and then also safety risks associated with the mental health conditions. So obviously, if you have mental health issues, especially in adolescence, you're more at risk. You take more risks. There's a tendency to take more risks. And I don't know about you, but when I look at all this, I don't necessarily think that this is about vision. I think this could be applied to any neurodevelopmental disorder, really. And blindness is in the list of what is considered in the US a neurodevelopmental disorder, and so is severe hearing impairment, but not all the degrees of vision impairment and auditory impairment. But really, the logic is very similar in all of these. So you probably all have an understanding of the prevalence of neurodevelopmental disorders in the US. The picture in the low and medium income countries is a little bit different. Mostly, we don't have a lot of data from low and medium income countries. It's growing, but we don't have a lot of data to say, because there's not a lot of screening and not a lot of diagnosis, to say this is the prevalence. So we can make estimates, but in an effort to really drive change, international health organizations came up with this concept. It was in 2004, that, okay, we don't have data, so we're going to qualify it as risk of not reaching the developmental potential because of poverty. And they gathered a panel of experts, and they really, with all the knowledge that came from neuroscience about brain plasticity, about all the factors that go into brain plasticity, a lot of knowledge that could have come from your labs, they analyzed the situation in low and middle income countries and saw that there were three main axes that could be potentially hindering the development of these brains of these children. One of them is health. It starts well before the child is even born. Maternal health, intrauterine growth restriction, prematurity in settings where there's no resources to cope with that. And then after the child is born, malaria, tuberculosis, helminth tick infections, all of these could directly affect the brain. And then everything else, also a lot of other pathologies that could affect the brain. And then another one is growth. And growth brings us to nutrition. How much the child grows in the first months of their lives. If you have kids, you know that we chart them very regularly. A drop in the growth charts has been highly correlated with also brain development later on and academic potential learning. So this metric is not only about how your body is it's how your body is developing, and that includes your brain. And a big problem was stunting, and more we call it the double burden, undernutrition and obesity that go hand in hand. So that was a big aspect. And then the third axis, stress. Stress, very vague term. We all have stress. But in this case, they're talking about what came from the behavioral science labs, the notion of toxic stress. Stress when there's no resources to cope with that stress, and that from a very young age, from violence, from drug abuse with the parents, from lack of information from the parents. And also what goes in there, concept of stress and of that parental environment, is the stimulation that the parent is giving. So that responsive kind of interaction with the child. And that's not always the case. Another factor in there is maternal depression, which is also very linked with women's rights around the world. So these were the three main axes that they said, okay, we don't have data, but this is potentially hindering brain development. And from this, we can estimate how many children are at risk. And they came up with this 40% number, which is huge, right? Millions, billions of children now around the world. So let's do something about it. So they came up with this nurturing care wheel, which were the axes that they were going to encourage action. Encouraging action means funding for all kinds of initiatives, selecting the startup projects, giving money to governments to act on these axes. So it's good health to respond to all those problematics that are presented, adequate nutrition to combat stunting, and to a lesser extent obesity, responsive caregiving to lower stress and give the child more resources, security and safety, and opportunity for early learning. Again, all these concepts came from an understanding from public health departments of what had come of neuroscience labs, of how the brain develops, of how the brain grows, of myelination and pruning, and behavioral studies. So this is the translation into action in low and middle income countries. And they had good results. You see in 2004, and they repeated the study in 2010, and you can see that you have a drop in the number of children that are affected by the same parameter, so at risk of not reaching their developmental potential. So, okay, great. We acted, we did something, and we had a positive effect.
Very well welcome. Thank you to Maria and everyone else from MIT for the extremely fascinating discussions earlier today. This was really, I hope, a great beginning for very fruitful collaborations. So let me tell you a little bit about how we can potentially transform education through neuroscience, and God knows we really need it. So I will start with a disclaimer, so please don't shoot me. What I will present is my own perspective based on some of the innovations and things that I've learned of, encountered, or spearheaded myself, and research findings created by some of the active players in the field of education neuroscience. And I'm very, very happy to discuss different viewpoints. Right, so where are we now? So let's imagine, for example, little Stephanie, and let's say that we are the teacher, and we think that maybe she is struggling with attention. So how do we measure it? Well, if we build on the canon of research, we could test her, for example, attentional skills with the traditional visual search paradigm. That would be completely fine. That'll be the actually high-level research. If you're quite crazy, then we could test it with Where's Waldo sets, because that's naturalistic. But kind of this is how selective attention, our ability to select the currently relevant information in the external environment actually comes about. So these are the demands that we're meeting, where visual information typically is linked to auditory information and all the other senses, right? And our tools currently do not really reflect that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So when we think of our little Stephanie, in fact, the demands that she's meeting while trying to attend the classroom are sort of more like this. Right, so for better or for worse, yesterday a PISA 22 report has been released. The results are somewhat complex. Definitely, COVID was a curveball. I'll try to give you a bit of a summary both on what's happened in 22 in the States as well as in Switzerland, just to try to draw some parallels. Some of the results are interesting, and we can discuss them a little bit more. So both countries, Switzerland and the States, were fully or mostly above the average across the three domains, so math, reading, and science. The issue areas were reading in Switzerland, perhaps not surprisingly, and in the States it was maths, where actually it was below the international average. However, long-term overall trend were actually either weak decreases in Switzerland and/or improvements in those areas, in the context of weak decreases across the whole world. In terms of the SES effects, those had an average effect in the States, which I find extremely puzzling, and actually an above average effect in Switzerland. Here, math was used as an example. Sort of, I would say that this is the opposite, but perhaps exactly covered through a curveball. And Switzerland, being a relatively small country, maybe was sensitive to sort of irregularities. However, in the context of this, the States actually had an average percent of resilient disadvantaged students, which perhaps kind of builds on a sort of a tradition of coping with the disadvantage, while Switzerland, and in Switzerland this percentage was below average. And finishing in terms of the immigration and language effects, just to give you all a context, so Switzerland has 3 times the international average of immigrant learners, and the States has 2 times the international average of immigrant students. So while Swiss students all scored above average, again here we're using math as an example, so non-immigrant students, second-generation immigrant, and first-generation immigrant students, it was quite not surprisingly, it was the non-immigrant students that had the advantage. In the States, however, it was the non-immigrant students who were doing below average, while the other 2 groups of first and second generation immigrants were doing just above the international average. Very interesting. Right. In any case, we have issues to address, and certainly I think the reports that will be, the PISA reports that will be coming out in 23 and 24 perhaps will give us a bit of a better idea of what's happening, because COVID certainly has the ways in which different countries were dealing with COVID and reopening schools earlier, faster, etc., or had the resources to cope with the negative consequences, surely had an idea. Where are we in general with education? In both countries, the practice and policies are very little guided by science. One of the great important issues is the heterogeneity, both from the point of view of addressing the issues in heterogeneity, but also in terms of capitalizing on it. We can talk about many different types of heterogeneity, learning difficulties or challenges for those who are neurodivergent, the effects of socioeconomic background, the language proficiency of immigrant families, and finally neurodiversity. And all of those issues have been strongly exacerbated by COVID, and with better or worse effects, countries have coped with it. And in terms of more specific issues, for example, the States, this is more safety. I mean, we know what we're talking about here. And for Switzerland, it's more the idea of creating more makers than thinkers. And just a few days ago, has been released an independent report that has said, so in Switzerland, 2/3 of the eligible students actually go to vocation training. It's a sign of pride for Switzerland. However, the report says that this separation and selection is somewhat too early. It's very difficult to judge someone's potential after the 6th grade. It's too drastic, so it's very difficult to go back to the university track. And finally, this report has estimated the potential loss of financial benefits for Swiss economy up to 300 million Swiss francs. So that's certainly something also to think in the context of sort of the skills that future citizens need to have in the current extremely volatile and dynamically changing world. Right, so where should we be going? First of all, I think we should be creating and implementing evidence base. So how we can do that? Well, first of all, we should be creating better theories. How? Well, most of what we know about the mind and the brain and learning and education comes actually from classic, but this doesn't work, never mind. Classic laboratory research where you have a single stimulus presented at one time on the screen, and we would record either EEG to it or responses in the MR. And through this, it's a very important effort. We kind of build the blocks of cognition and education, and it was very important. However, clearly, we don't really process information in scanners or while wearing caps inside labs that is where the information is very stripped down and simplified. What we rather doing is we're coping exactly with the complexity in everyday life, and so the demands are slightly different. So to trying to address this challenge, many researchers in the last, let's say, 5 years have come out of the lab and put all kinds of wearable technologies and neuroimaging technologies on people, including students, and they started recording all kinds of signals. But this is great for naturalness. The question is, do we know what we are recording? That's a sort of a question that we can't really answer at this moment with certainty. And what we're missing here is the wonderful rigor and the process specificity of our behavioral and neural responses that we've recorded in the laboratory or in carefully controlled settings. So which way should we go? But a couple of years ago, we have proposed a sort of a middle ground, and I proposed a framework, a 3-stage cyclical framework, where we should also try to add a separate stage where we try to merge the two approaches. So use the rigor of the laboratory studies and the measures that we have been developing across decades now, but also try to emulate some of the variabilities that exist there in everyday environments, but trying to do it in the lab or in slightly more rigorous settings. And if we take, for example, literacy or numeracy, we should do it in a sort of an iterative fashion where we develop our hypothesis in the lab. Then we take it when we increase the complexity of those tests. For example, by using multisensory stimulation. So we have experts here. We add and manipulate the attentional demands, the cognitive demands, and then for the final tests of how a certain process occurs, we take it outside of the lab. And based on what we learn and then testing it, a theory about it, we go back into the lab and we test further ideas about it. So as always, science happens in an iterative way. What else can we do? So with just so happens that with a very large group of collaborators, we have also designed a tool where scientists themselves, just not leaving their laptops, can self-identify the work or the study that they were planning in terms of how ecological it is. So in using this simple questionnaire that is available online, and here's the link, sorry, it doesn't really print well, but I can give you a link. People need to answer what type of stimuli you're using, whether they're simple stimuli exactly, they're more naturalistic, is it a social interaction, is it in the lab, is it a video? So by answering 11 or 12 questions, you produce a sort of a spider graph that shows you towards which of those three approaches your study goes towards. And this gives you, the self-evaluation gives you an idea of maybe perhaps on which direction you can potentially increase the ecological validity of your investigation. So that's one quick way in which every scientist not doing extra effort can increase the ecological validity of their own work. That's great. Okay, but actually, there's a high responsibility on us, those who are interested in education and learning disorders and development. So we actually have to be talking to educators and practitioners because, well, we don't really know much about how education happens in everyday life. So there are multiple initiatives that are actually very exciting. For example, there's the Education Endowment Foundation, which proposes to schools to take part in RCTs that test specific interventions, and there's money attached to it. And so some of the ideas that have come out of the lab are directly tested in classroom settings. And on their website, there's whole infrastructure and people working on testing those and then creating reports and then creating an evidence-based database. I think that's really great. On the other hand, for sort of a less established effects, one of our colleagues and collaborators, Nike van Attenveld, have actually proposed a framework on how to engage educators across all of the different stages of the scientific process. So not just treating educators as our gateway to our test populations, but rather going to them, asking them, what type of issues are you encountering that we can address in our work? And then what type of data we should be collecting? What type of how to analyze this data? How to interpret it? And what type of modalities actually we should be investigating in terms of their efficacy? For them, for example, this was the neurofeedback, and they got some very interesting ideas about whether neurofeedback is actually a viable, interesting, or even ethical modality to be investigating as an intervention for students to improve their attainment. Right. Better yet, and that's why there's a little asterisk there, we create schools that are in fact are laboratories in of themselves. So one such exceptional example is in California. It's called the Synapse School. It's led scientifically by Bruce McCandless, who's one of the forefathers of education and neuroscience. And there, multiple academics who are experts in the area work together with practitioners, and they're creating curricula. They are adding some of the elements that are not really typical for regular curricula, such as social-emotional learning, teaching innovation, a meeting with change makers. All of that is sort of a melting pot of ideas and practices where teachers and educators work hand in hand. Probably one of the most exciting developments in the area for us as scientists in this field. Finally, while we create this evidence base, it needs to be actually used. So of course, there's also responsibility on the side of teachers or those who train teachers to try to use all of this important work that others have created, scientists have created, and actually deploy it during practice in the classroom. So many resources exist. Some of those were strongly spearheaded by a person called Glenn Whitman, who has been developing the procedures for how to implement some of the early findings into the classroom. This has then been developed into the so-called Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning. And again, there's a not very visible link. I'm sorry about this. And they've offered a book that collects some of the most validated findings that exist there. And they also offer all kinds of trainings and diagnostics for teachers in terms of to what extent they actually believe in neuromyths and how this can be addressed. And they can even be certified in MB, in mind-brain education. So this is another important step more on the side of the practitioners. Right. What else we need to do is to try to address the limitations and challenges in learners. So I try to pay attention to the language I'm using here. If you think about our little Stephanie, one of the more important ideas here is to try to design better screening and diagnostic tools. So why Stephanie has issues with paying attention or learning, well, perhaps she's just arrived to Switzerland and actually she doesn't speak French or German. And the teacher, she had a bit of a support in terms of her language, but she's still struggling. And now what do we need to do? Well, she would be actually taking an IQ test, even also including a battery of tests for the nonverbal skills. And that's all nice and dandy. However, the nonverbal scale also has instructions that are in the home country language. So there's still a language limitation. And then depending on how she would do, or if she did badly, the question is she struggling with language or she actually has learning difficulties? And at this moment, we cannot answer this very well unless there's additional translator and additional resources involved. And that's a problem exactly with using the standardized tests that we currently have, and they kind of separate those who have need and they are biased towards those who for whom those tests were created, but they are not equitable across all of the populations that are now that create our students. So immigrants, etc., and people without language proficiency. Right. So what should we be doing? For example, when screening, I guess that's close to obvious. We should be screening early and easy. Some of the latest interesting developments in the area are is a questionnaire, a very quick 2-3 minute checklist that can be administered by a pediatrician. It's been developed by Nadine Gab here from Harvard University. That kind of very quickly can identify the early markers of disabilities, and they have created actually fantastically 4 different versions for each age group between pre-K to second grade. Yes, so the effort is ongoing, but I think that's something very cool because these days the formal diagnosis of learning, for example, literacy difficulties happens 1 year after the instruction starts, which obviously is when it's already too late, right? So we want to check for those early issues and we want to address them as soon as possible, and this is not happening right now. So some of the exciting ideas is exactly trying to make very easy tools fast and try to give them and pinpoint those early markers, and we're starting to understand what those are. Great. Okay, when it comes to diagnosis, what should we be focusing on? On key mechanisms, and should be updating our knowledge what those are. The diagnosis should be using objective measures and also cost-effective, as Katja has explained at length. So since 1998, officially, we do believe that dyslexia actually is a more, or at least predominantly a deficit in phonological awareness, and that can be tested extremely easily by having the child, for example, identify words that rhyme or not, or by counting syllables. But this is not how we, up until today, are testing for dyslexia. In terms of objectivity and cost effectiveness, some of the leaders in the field, so John Gabrieli, who's here at MIT, has shown that a combination of ROI markers, so overactivity of frontal cortex areas that show the likely compensatory mechanisms in dyslexics, together with the integrity of the pathways within the auditory cortices that are important for speech. The combination of those two predictors actually can give us 72% predictability of which of the dyslexics will actually improve after 2.5 years and which won't. And this is a performance that was not obtained by any of the standardized 17 tests, I think, that are typically used to diagnose a dyslexic and for also prognosis. Sort of expectedly, as I'm an EEG researcher, I will say a little bit about that. So perhaps EEG is a good idea for a cost-effective and objective measure of potential learning difficulties. To give you a bit of a context, EEG these days since already 2013 is an accepted tool for diagnosing, for example, ADHD. And ever since 2009, we've known that EEG can offer us indices that predict reading ability throughout primary school. Also, some of the work that I've been doing is just preliminary work combining well-understood markers of selective attention using naturalistic stimuli and EEG and multivariate analysis that have been being developed in Switzerland can offer us potentially some robust markers of learning proficiency, but then perhaps also learning difficulties. Right. So based on this, and based on other work, we should also be designing better preventional programs or sort of a compensatory program. So how many of you know what is the 30 million word issue? So that probably 12 or 15 years ago, what's been found is that 30 million words is the difference in the vocabulary between children that come from high SES backgrounds versus those who come from low SES backgrounds. And this difference occurs before those children start school. That's huge. So what's been proposed is that in order to address this, parents should be talking to their children more and using more complex words, etc., to try to alleviate those disadvantages of socioeconomic background at the development of learning capacities. More recently, what's been shown is actually what is important is not only the quantity of words that are produced by the parent at the child, but rather the quality of the interaction. So there's dyadic exchange. So the parent says something, and then the child says something, and the parent says something again. Not in a nervous situation. And this seems to be also even better improving the possibilities of children from those sensitive populations to be improving their language-related skills. Right. Finally, what should we be doing? Accommodating also differences in the information processing and a sort of a leeway towards neurodivergence and diversity. So how should we be doing this? Well, we should say we know. I believe that the evidence base nowadays is already strong to try to create better educational context. And what we know is that we should be creating more quieter classrooms. So some of the work that's been published in Mind-Brain Education, and I had the pleasure of creating a special issue before I was the editor-in-chief there, that collected papers that shown that, first of all, creating more stripped down and visually quiet classrooms are actually more conducive to learning because they load the visual attention less, and that frees up the resources. But also, those classrooms where there's a lot of noise actually are not very conducive to learning. So that's already given us an indicator, trying to strip it down and make them classrooms, of course, smaller, but also trying to silent them out. On the other hand, of course, everyone knows about the revolution that has come about through ChatGPT. And based on this and on an absolute revolution that has come about since, I think, October 2022, some of the educators and scientists of education have called the era of extreme learning. meaning where ChatGPT has completely upturned how learning occurs and can be supported, but also, of course, wherever there's a technology, there's also a risk. So what we know from observation is that these new educational tools, in fact, are quickly picked up by the highly skilled students and by the better schools and more well-equipped teachers, and so they give further privilege to the already privileged and students from good backgrounds, and they are and the students from unprivileged backgrounds are actually being left alone. But actually, extreme learning gives us the possibility for individualized learning, and that's kind of being able to tackle heterogeneity and address the needs and the capacities of each student is kind of the way to go. And this is, for example, represented by the mission of the Jacobs Foundation, so the big foundation in Zurich that has loads of money, and they are putting all of their funds on individualized learning, and this is what they think, what they're investing in, and think this is going to address the current so-called crisis in education, worldwide crisis in education. So, just to give you a couple of ideas, for example, ChatGPT can quickly give you ideas for new lesson scripts, but also individualization of those. Then there's DeepL has opened the content on the whole World Wide Web to anyone, because it can quickly translate it in the majority of languages that are typically used. Then you have Killbot with paraphrases, and so the students can learn how to write better, faster. There's a tool called Elicit that helps you search for evidence, which is completely revolutionary for the current world where we have a lot of misinformation, and we know the consequences of that. And also tools such as Synthesia and Beautiful Eye that help that create videos and presentations that can create captivating materials. And as we know, neurodivergent students have a higher demands and also lower resources for boring material. Right. So slowly finishing, I would just think about, I would just want to propose how we should be changing our curriculum, so some of the elements that should be introduced or retained and make sure that we have them. And this applies both to curriculums as well as to rehabilitation. So to me, these are the two sides of the same coin. So we should be paying attention and screening for sensory skills. I guess Katja has proven that absolutely beyond any doubt. A large percentage, for example, of the population actually is stereoblind. We don't know that. We think that this is, for example, an issue of amblyopia. So this is another big visual developmental disorder where one of the eyes is not working very well. But in fact, in the healthy population, there's a high percentage of those who see the world in 2D. As you can imagine, as I see rows of people, being able to process information in 3D gives us a very different quality of life and information processing. But currently, we are not focusing on this. We're most certainly not screening for it. We should be thinking about cognitive capacities, both perhaps not straying away from action video games. Majority of you probably are parents and you hate tablets and you stay away from tablets. In fact, maybe there can be safeguards for developing capacities in those who perhaps might most need it. So perhaps you know about it. Several years ago, for the first time, an action video games was accepted as a non-pharmacological treatment for ADHD. A simple game. So that's certainly something to think about. But also, many RCTs are currently in progress on the effects of meditation and mindfulness meditation as a sort of a protective, an engine of protective capabilities, both for attentional processes, but also for not separately so emotional capacities that can create or have created resilience to cope with issues triggered by COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, thinking about how we can develop more strongly, and perhaps this is more directed towards educators in the States, how to develop better socio-emotional skills. And there's more and more currently apps and games that are focusing on kindness and connection and cohesion. Here, one of those is called actually Kindness Kingdom. I invite you to look for it online. It's a very cool game. It's very simple. It actually comes from Switzerland, and it's great fun, and it's extremely wholesome. Last but not least, actually, is physical activity. time and time again, we hear, oh yes, my little son didn't want to go to pee, so I just gave him, I give him a note, and then he doesn't go because he doesn't like it. By all means, we have to force kids to do this and continue so, and create new ways in which they can stay physically active. Physical activity is one of the easiest, most effective protective factor against the development of learning difficulties. It's we have very strong evidence for that. So this should be both. When we think about how to rehabilitate the brain, this should be included and treated holistically, but also in the curriculum, this should never be removed, and we should never allow kids to not take part and not be physically active. And so there's this a bit of staying physically active, but by all means, physical activity is extremely important. Also for neurodivergent students to be addressing their challenges that they have. So these are some of the ideas that have been proposed, already investigated by people here in Boston and outside, and to try to pursue them and try to give exactly a roadmap. We will be creating a sort of a work group. So Maria here and several other people, Micah across the Sense and then Boston MIT, will be trying to to build on some of those ideas to give a new direction in this area. Thank you very much.